Hi there, this is Professor Eric Steinhardt, and let's talk about cannabis and enhancement. So, what's enhancement mean? Well, one way to think about enhancement is to contrast it with therapy. Therapy is something that you do to achieve normality. So, therapy is often medical, right? If I have a medical condition that makes some function of my body less than normal, and normal means statistically normal, right? It's not a moral category. Then I use therapy of some kind to increase my functionality up to the normal range. For instance, glasses. I have these eyeglasses, and my vision naturally is less than normal. So, what do? I put on these glasses. They're therapeutic. They make my vision into a normal range. So, okay, therapies normalize, they make your body function statistically normal. And many kinds of drugs and other medical devices are used to normalize body functions. Now, what about enhancement? The goal of enhancement is to make you super normal, beyond normal. And we always encounter people, we know that there are people who have supernormal abilities, right? Those people are, for instance, elite athletes, elite musicians, elite performers of almost any skill. An elite basketball player has supernormal ability to play basketball, supernormal speed, coordination, right, reaction time, right, and ability to move their body, hand-eye coordination, endurance, all these things above normal. A supernormal chess player like Magnus Carlsen, right, he can do something that, in fact, no other human can do. He's the champion chess player of the world. No other human is as good as him. He's got an elite or supernormal performance at chess. And certainly you can think of, great mathematicians, great scientists, great philosophers who have supernormal abilities or functions. So enhancement tries to make someone closer to that supernormal level, right? And if you want to think of this maybe in some ancient philosophical terms, right? Enhancement makes you into what the ancient philosophers would have called a hero. And a hero doesn't mean, someone who saves the day. It just means somebody whose performance and abilities are greater than any normal human ability, like Hercules, a male hero, or Atalanta, a female hero in the ancient Greek and Roman mythological worlds, right? So this notion of enhancement appears philosophically in Plato, right, in his myth of the cave, where he describes four levels that human beings can go through, from a really kind of subnormal and dysfunctional, level of existence in the cave to an escape from the cave to a higher world, which is a world where our functionalities are godlike. We become like gods or goddesses. And so, okay, there's a long-standing tradition in Western thought about becoming enhanced, about improving your body to have godlike powers. Right now, these gods or goddesses were pagan gods and goddesses, not the Christian God. Right, so Apollo is the god of music. He has superhuman musical skill. Right, Athena is a goddess of many things, for instance, weaving, and she has superhuman weaving skill, right? Thor, right, a god who has superhuman strength, or Zeus, who has superhuman strength, right? Poseidon has a superhuman ability to sort of live like a fish in the ocean. So all these gods and goddesses have superhuman abilities, and one of the long-standing goals of enhancement has been to try to make people, humans, ordinary humans, more like these divine beings, more like these divine animals, right? Wouldn't it be great to be able to play music like Apollo can play music? Okay. People have long used drugs in various ways for the sake of enhancement, right? So we know, I'm sure we're all familiar with scandals in sports, doping, right? In cycling, Lance Armstrong, super bicyclist, wins the Tour de France many times, but he was using drugs, right? And he wasn't just using simple steroids; he was using some pretty complicated medical procedures, right? Getting his blood replaced and things like like this, erythropoietin, very complicated molecules, to enhance his performance to be better than any other human cyclist. Right? We know about others who have used various kinds of steroids in sports and bodybuilding, in baseball. Right? Steroids can make your body perform athletically at a much higher level than normal ability. So you take a baseball player who has already elite performance level, give them steroids, and they can just do better than anyone else. Right? So doping in sports, as it's called, is an effort to use drugs or chemicals or other medical procedures to gain a sort of superhuman performance and beat everybody else in the competition. People sometimes think various drugs can be used to enhance brain power, right? Nootropics, they're called. Things like maybe Adderall are claimed to be able to help with brain power or stamina. So, okay, what about cannabis, right? What about cannabis? Is it used for anything in enhancement? Well, there are, various claims, and this is why enhancement is an extension of medicine. And this is why you've got to be skeptical about enhancement claims. You've got to think of enhancement with the same kind of data or evidence as you would look for in a medical use. There's maybe 3 or so ways, there may be 4, that cannabis has been used for enhancement. One, there's lots of claims that cannabis can be used to enhance artistic ability, particularly musical ability. Right? And so an artist can take cannabis and create greater art. Now, already an artist, somebody who's successful as an artist, right, is already at an elite level of creativity, an elite level of artistic skill. So the claim here is that cannabis can help them be even better at being an artist. It can facilitate greater creativity. There's 2 ways that might happen. One way is it might happen through, divergent thinking. Their thought processes can explore, cannabis frees them for their thought processes to explore new combinations of ideas, right? Cannabis actually helps the mind become a little looser, and it can generate novel combinations of ideas. And so another way, though, that's also interesting is that artists have to violate conventions, right? Think of Pablo Picasso and Cubism, or Dali and Surrealism, right? There are these conventions, conventional ways of painting, or jazz musicians, right? There were conventional ways of making music. And so an artist has to be able to violate conventions in order to be creativity. To do something new, you've got to do something different from the old. Conventions are social norms, and so there's social stigma associated with violating conventions, right? There's social threat to violating conventions, right? If you make some new kind of art, people could say it's horrible, it's terrible. Stop making these weird pictures. You're a weirdo and a freak. They can be judgmental and hostile. Right? And so an artist has to have a certain degree of courage or a certain degree of ability to violate the social conventions and the norms. And again, this could be part of the use of cannabis to turn down social threat perception, right? If I think, society, they're going to just judge my art so horribly, I won't make art. But if I think this society's not so bad, people are generous, they tend to be kind and good, then I might be a little more freer in my willingness to violate conventions. I might fear social judgment less. And if I fear social judgment less, then I'll be more likely to create. So, okay, art and music, right? 2 pretty well established uses of cannabis for enhancement. It's not entirely clear how good cannabis is at enhancing artistic or musical creativity, but there's pretty decent evidence that it helps. Another area is female sexuality. Right? Sometimes women have trouble having orgasms, getting pleasure from sex. They may have sexual anxiety. And here it's important to contrast the female sexual response with the male sexual response, because cannabis here is very different for women and men. Right? There's very good evidence that cannabis helps, particularly THC, right, and CBD together, help female sexual performance, and performance might be the wrong word, but that women are able to have, who are not orgasmic, they can have orgasms, or they have more powerful orgasms, or they're more receptive to sexual activity that they want, of course, consensual. So cannabis seems to do this in a lot of ways, THC especially. One way is that THC seems to be more connected towards the female hormone systems. Right. On the contrary, for men, cannabis can be very bad for sexual performance. And I'm not just talking about people think the obvious, for the male to get an erection, have an orgasm, things like that. That's certainly not all there is. Right. Cannabis, CBD, and THC seem to suppress male sex drive. They seem to depress male libido to make men less interested in sex. They seem to be able, the evidence is a little controversial, but seem to be able to make it more difficult for men to get erections and orgasm, and definitely decrease the male's sperm count and testosterone production. Again, this seems to come from the fact that cannabis is similar or has some kind of effects like estrogens or other female sex hormones. Again, some of this is controversial. It's all being studied. But when you think about cannabis for an enhancement, you've got to think about bodies, and male bodies are different than female bodies. Obviously, we all know that. But when you get into the molecular level of biochemistry around human sexuality, bear in mind, right? You can't just say cannabis is good for sex. Cannabis helps sex, gives people more sexual pleasure. No, there's no such thing as people here or humans. There's males and females and, all kinds of combinations of sexual and gender bodies that can be benefited by cannabis or harmed. Right? So there's a need for precision when we think about cannabis and enhancement. Here's a kind of fourth way to think about cannabis and enhancement, is thinking about ways cannabis might enhance knowledge, the ability to gain knowledge. And one way this comes into use with cannabis is with religion. Right? Cannabis has long been used in religious rituals, religious ceremonies, and sometimes it's used, for instance, in Shaivite Hinduism, right? The Shiva worshipping Hindus, to gain an awareness of Shiva, to arouse the power of Shiva in your own body. Right, so people take cannabis. They would smoke the sadhus cannabis, and they would say they feel the high. It's like a Eucharist in Christianity, right? It's like the body of Shiva. They feel the god Shiva becoming present in their body, and they know what it's like to be Shiva. They gain this knowledge of what it's like to be Shiva, to experience themselves channeling Shiva. Rastafarians had a similar kind of doctrine, which comes from their influence from the Hindu Shaivite sadhus in Jamaica, which was that they talked about nature with a capital N, right? And nature with a capital N is kind of like the presence of God within your body, right? The Rastafarians having a kind of syncretic Jewish, Christian, Hindu conception of God. Right? So nature would be aroused in your body when you took cannabis, right? So if a god or a goddess is aroused within your body when you take cannabis, you're getting a knowledge, a kind of religious experience, religious knowledge of the god, the deity. And you might think of the musician who takes cannabis to make better music as somehow channeling Apollo, right? Getting more intimate awareness of what it's like to be like Apollo, even though, of course, they're not Apollo, they're not a god or a goddess of any kind. And so cannabis, right, can be used for enhancement possibly in these four ways, right? Artistic, sexual, musical, and for enhanced knowledge. And still, it's sort of controversial whether cannabis helps to enhance people. Right? And another way that might be mentioned here, it's not clear if it's enhancement, would be social, right? Cannabis can help people overcome social anxiety and enhance their ability to socially relate to each other. We talked about that with asceticism. It's not clear that that's really enhancement or whether it's therapy. So you always got to think about the difference between therapy and enhancement when you're thinking about claims that people make that cannabis improves their lives or makes their lives better. What does better mean? Enhancement is one way that our lives can become better.